following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back, and you are comfortably zoned with me, the Zig Zag Man, in Alameda, California, right across the bay from San Francisco, across the moat from Oakland, and in the northern part of the great state of Alameda. Could be the greatest state in the Union, could be New York, could be Boston. Which is it, Jerry Feitelberg? You're in Alameda now?
Yep, 100%.
All right. How are you?
I'm doing well. Staying dry. We've had this, what do they call it, this atmospheric river that's pounded the Bay Area for the last couple of days, but we're doing okay.
Yeah, and it's cold, too. It's very unlike Northern California. We had a great week last week where it was sunny, and this week it's rainy. So that's winter. What are you going to do?
Yeah,
Jerry,
we need the rain. We need the rain in California. It hadn't rained for months until a couple of weeks ago, and then we had a little smattering, but we need the rain, especially up in the Sierras for the snowpack, to keep the reservoirs full and keep us being able to water our lawns in the summertime.
Yeah, keeps the fires down too,
Good.
which will be welcome come summertime. Let me ask you a question, Jerry. You've agreed to talk about a subject that is one of the most confusing subjects to the Gentile world. We are two Jews, and both living in California. What is Zionist? What is a Zionist to you?
Well,
what does it mean?
That is a good question. Zionism was founded around 1897, and it was the objections of Zionism was the promotion by appropriate means of the settlement of Palestine for Jewish farmers, artisans, and manufacturers. It was the organization and unity of the whole of Jewry by means of appropriate institutions, both local and international, in accordance with the laws of each country, as strengthening and fostering Jewish sentiment and national consciousness. And it was preparation towards obtaining the consent of governments where necessary to reach the goals of Zionism, which was to establish a Jewish home in Palestine, which later became Israel.
Now, tell me, I think I know part of it, but if you would inform me and the audience, what made this necessary? What was the world like in those days that forced Jews to get together like this for that purpose?
That's a good question. We have to look back at history, and we can go back to England in the 13th century, where they expelled the Jews from England in the 12th century, and they were not in England for 200 years. Go up to the 15th century, 1492, with Isabella and Ferdinand of Spain, when they instituted the Jewish Inquisition, which said to the Jewish people in Spain, either convert, leave, or die. And many of the Jews did leave, and they moved to Eastern Europe, up into the northern territories. And they had the Portuguese Inquisition, and going up now into the 19th century, the pogroms in Russia, where the Jews were being forced out of these little villages that they lived in, and most of them were migrating at that time to the United States. About 150,000 migrated to Britain. Many of them went to Palestine to become farmers, artisans, and manufacturers. So these are some of the reasons the Jews have been kicked out of so many countries over the years. They've found themselves to be in hostile countries. If you go to Italy, we get the word ghetto. That was the Italian word for the areas where the Jews were confined to live. I believe in cities like Venice and Florence, and to a degree, they weren't welcome in that country either. So, anti-Semitism has been a problem. The persecution and execution of the Jews have been going on for many, many years. But I think the Russian pogroms became the springboard for the creation of the Zionist movement.
Okay. As my memory is that it really took hold after Exodus. Am I correct?
Well, yeah. We there's a little more history. When you're talking about Exodus, you're talking after World War II, where you had the mass migration into Palestine after the death camps of Hitler. We got a little more history to get to before we get to that part of it. So
okay.
If you could be just so kind to humor me while we go through this. Yeah. You have to go back. I told you the Zionist movement was founded by Theodor Herzl in 1897. Herzl died in 1904, and then Chaim Weizmann took over for Herzl and was very involved in the creation of the State of Israel. But in 1914, we had World War I. The Ottoman Empire, which controlled Palestine, it controlled Syria, controlled Iraq. I don't think Iraq was a country for 500 years. The Ottoman Empire stretched from the Balkans through the Middle East. I think perhaps the Saudis were under the control of the Ottomans, and as I mentioned earlier, there were 150,000 Jewish people who were living in Britain, and the Brits were very unhappy about it. In 1917, there was a declaration passed by the name known as the Balfour Declaration, and it was announced on November 2nd, 1917, and it was a letter from Arthur James Balfour to Lord Rothschild, and it goes this way. Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure conveying to you on behalf of His Majesty's government the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. Yours, Arthur James Balfour, and that became the document that the Zionist movement was hoping for. It gave international recognition to the fact that there should be an establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. So that was, and of course the war ended in 1918. The British, as you know, had control. They had the protectorate of all the territory in the Middle East that came under the control when the World War I ended. So now they drew lines in the sand to create countries like Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and Palestine, and there was a country known as Transjordan. And those countries existed up until World War II. In the interim, there was, as I said, there was a lot of mass migration from the villages and shtetls in Russia and Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland, all these countries. The Jews were coming to the United States, and they were going to Israel. And in Israel, they started farms, and there was tensions between the Arabs and the Jews in those days too. And there was in 1936, there was an Arab uprising against the Jews, and a lot of the Arabs worked for the Jews who had a tremendous business growing oranges and shipping oranges all over the world. And the Arab uprising crushed it, and all those businesses were lost. And then, of course, in Germany, in the 30s, you had the Hitler and the establishment of the concentration camps. A lot of the German Jews couldn't get out of Germany. Had they been able to get out of Germany, some of them were trying to get to Palestine. Some of them went to Shanghai, come to the United States, and a lot of them were just willing to get out of Germany. So you have all this going on, and then, of course, during the war, and then when the war was over, the horrors of the concentration camps, where 6 million Jews were killed. The world was revulsed by what happened during World War II, and the idea of a Jewish settlement, a Jewish homeland in Palestine became fruition. I forgot to mention that back when the Balfour Declaration was passed, after World War I, there was an organization created, was known as the League of Nations. The United States did not join the League of Nations, but the League had no objection to a homeland for the Jewish people at that time. Franklin Roosevelt didn't have any opinion one way or the other. I don't think he favored the establishment of the Jewish home in Palestine. But in 1945, the world created the United Nations, and this time the United States became a member. And after Roosevelt's death in 1945, Harry Truman became president, and Harry Truman had a former business partner in Kansas City whose name was Eddie Jacobson, and Eddie Jacobson pressured Truman to approve the United States supporting the establishment of the State of Israel, which they did. And in 1947, the United Nations voted to partition Palestine, and part of it went into the country of Jordan, and the other part became the State of Israel. And in May of 1948, the State of Israel was born.
Wow, I never heard of Harry Jacobson. You say he was Truman's associate in business before he became president. Was he appointed? Did he have a place in the administration, or was this just
no?
Okay.
He was he and Truman had the haberdashery store in Kansas City before Truman became a senator. So they were longtime friends. They were just friends.
Okay. Boy, I never realized that Harry Truman had a bit of Zionism in him. That's that's new to me. Great. After, are we about the time? I have so many questions about the exodus from Israel and from Germany, from the concentration camps. And who set up Israel as was it England who was responsible for setting up Israel to migrate to?
Well, if you recall, the Balfour Declaration laid the groundwork for the establishment of the Jewish home in Palestine, which became Israel. After World War II, they had all these people that were displaced, and they had to do something with them. And a lot of the famous story about the ship known as the Exodus, how they had to run the British blockade to get to Israel and into Palestine, and which they did. Once it became a state, then immigration into Israel. They encouraged immigration from Israel, from all the people that were living in these displaced person camps. And they got, a lot of Palestinians had to move to Jordan, but at the same time, the Arab countries exiled about 800,000 Jews from their countries. Iraq, for example, and I just learned this recently, the city of Baghdad was 40% Jewish before World War II. 40%.
Ooh.
Yeah,
wow.
And in 1950, the Iraqis started to execute the Jews, and so there was all the Jews left Iraq and went to Israel at that time. And in fact, last year in 2019, when we were in Israel and we had Passover dinner, one of the people there was a lady that came from Iraq, and she did not speak any English. She only spoke Arabic and Hebrew. Her daughter was there to translate. She was a very lovely lady. But, people don't realize that there were that many people coming from the Arab states into Israel. And, of course, there are Ethiopian Jews. There are Jews from Uganda, Jews from South Africa. A lot of people from all over the world have emigrated to Israel.
Okay. How did Palestine become Israel?
Oh, Palestine was never a country. It was a protectorate. It was under, as I mentioned earlier, it was under the control of the Ottoman Empire for 500 years. The people who lived in Palestine up until living there until the Ottoman Empire fell in 1918, considered themselves to be subjects of the Ottoman Empire. They didn't consider them to be Palestinians.
Okay. When it did become Israel, did Palestinians tell me about the extent of their displacement or their feelings of being displaced?
Yeah, well, that's been a subject for discussion for many, many years. Many of them, when Palestine was partitioned into Israel and Jordan, many of them had the opportunity to go to Jordan. Those that remained apparently are Israeli citizens. And in fact, today, I think of the 9 million people that live in Israel, 7 million are Jews and 2 million are Arabs. So they are Israeli citizens. They have all the rights of Israeli citizens. The only thing that they can do is serve in the military.
Okay. Tell me about the conflicts that exist between Arabs and Jews today.
Well, in Palestine, in Israel, the city of Jerusalem was partitioned, and it was held. They had the Arab section, then they had the Jewish section, and the Israelis got control of it in the 1967 war. Then they have total control of the city of Jerusalem now. And there are a lot of Arab people who live and work in Jerusalem. They have their mosque. They have the Dome of the Rock, and there are tensions there. The West Bank and Gaza are Palestinian territories, although a lot of the Jewish people have settled into the West Bank. So there's tension. There's tension there, and the people in the West Bank that area is controlled by the PLO, and it's Mohammed Abbas is the leader, and in Gaza it's controlled by Hamas, and Hamas's sole intention is to drive Israel into the sea, and so. Abbas's position may be a little bit softer, but he has to take the position that he wants to destroy Israel because he would get killed if he didn't. So the problem that the Israelis have, that in order to have peace in Israel, you have to have a partner, and they don't have a partner. When you have a partner that wants to kill you, there's no negotiation. So until and the late Golda Meir, who was Prime Minister of Israel, once said, when the Arabs love their children more than they hate us, the Israelis, will have peace. But that hasn't happened yet. So,
okay.
So there are tensions.
Tell us how the current Benjamin Netanyahu government is doing and what they're doing, and how their government has been compared to Trump, and what the situation is.
Well, Benjamin Netanyahu is probably the longest-serving prime minister ever in Israeli history. Years ago, the major political party in Israel was the Labor Party, but that changed when Menachem Begin became prime minister. He was a member of the Likud party, and they tended to be, I don't know, more if militant is the right word, but they took a very, very, very pro-Israel position. And Netanyahu is the descendant of that thinking. They have a strong military. They want to maintain a strong military. They I don't know if they keep their thumb on the Arabs that live in the country, but as I said, you and I don't live there, and I've only been there once, and we on one trip down to the Negev, we saw a lot of Bedouin camps, and for the most part, the Bedouins are on welfare, and they make some money. They have their goats and their camels and what have you, and that's the lifestyle they choose. There are Arab enclaves in Tel Aviv and all around, and it's hard to tell. It was hard to tell what was going on, but I'm sure that there's tensions within the city and all the villages in the state of Israel.
What were the effects of making Jerusalem the capital?
Well, the Arabs were very upset about it, and the Israelis wanted it. Under the Trump administration, they moved, and Netanyahu wanted this too. He wanted the United States to move their embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which they did. and and it just gives more credence to the Jewish position that Jerusalem is the rightful capital of Israel. It doesn't mean that the Arabs can't be there, the Christians can't be there, but it says Israel is in control, and they've maintained that. In the meantime, Israel has, in 1978, when Jimmy Carter was president, Yasser Arafat and Menachem Begin made peace. They made peace with Jordan, and they made peace with Egypt. And those were the two Arab countries that Israel has had peaceful relationships for the last 40 years. In the last couple of the years, Israel has signed agreements with the United Arab Emirates, which is Abu Dhabi and Dubai, as well as Bahrain. So progress is being made in getting these peace agreements done and getting more normal relations in the Middle East. Does it mean that the Arabs are going to...
How big a part does Iran play in all of this?
Iran sponsors a lot of money on Hezbollah and getting arms to Hamas and Gaza Strip. The Ayatollahs in Iran are bad actors, and if Iran ever comes to the table and recognizes that the Middle East would be better with a peace agreement with the Israelis, it would be wonderful, but I don't see that happening as long as the Ayatollahs are in command of Iran. Iran, as you know, they're not an Arabic state. They're not Arabs. They're Caucasian, or I think they're Caucasians, but they're not Arabs. But nonetheless, they're Shia Muslims for the most part. And some of the other states are like Saudi Arabia are Sunni Muslims, and there's animosity between the Shia and the Sunnis. So who knows?
Now, Trump in his propaganda in his re-election campaign and even now boast that in his regime there's been peace in the Middle East. Quote. How do you respond to that?
Well, if you look at the agreements that with the three Arab countries that Israel signed agreements with, you can say yes, that's true, but it was only an itty bitty part of the puzzle. They still have to. Two major countries that have to come to the table are Saudi Arabia and Iran. Saudi is Sunni, Iran is Shia. There's bad blood between those two countries because Saudi Arabia thinks that Iran is supplying weapons to the rebels in Yemen, and there's been battles between those two countries. So it's going to be difficult to get those to agree to anything.
Okay. Let's look into the future a little bit. We have a new regime, the Biden regime, and in my head, I associate Biden with Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. I lump them together internationally, their international politicism, say. How do you think having Biden president will affect relations with Israel, and will it favor the Arab community or the Israeli community?
Yeah, let's just look back at what Trump and Netanyahu, the relationship they had was very strong. Netanyahu said that Trump was the best friend that Israel ever had, and Trump's behavior towards Israel was done probably for two reasons. One, it was very important for his Christian base. The evangelical Christians believe that for Jesus to come back for the rapture, what they believe the rapture to be, that Jerusalem and Israel must be in the hands of the Jewish people, number one. Number two, one of Trump's biggest donors was a gentleman that passed away a couple of weeks ago, Sheldon Adelson, who was a billionaire from Las Vegas. And his wife Miriam was born in Israel, and he made major donations to the Trump campaign, and he told Trump what Israel wanted, and Trump acted on that. And what they wanted was great military support from the United States, recognition of Jerusalem as the capital, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, and Trump did that for Netanyahu. Now, Netanyahu's relationship with Barack Obama was not the best. They felt that Obama didn't support them, give them the full support that other American presidents had done in the past. And Biden was in that administration. So it remains to see. But I believe that Biden, because he was on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for many, many years and well acquainted with the problems in the Middle East and will have the say, I believe that Biden will have a strong position of support for Israel and will be a good friend to Israel. How much, I don't know. He's got other things on his plate right now. But
right now, he certainly does.
Yeah.
And let's get off Israel for a second and talk about the situation of today and Biden. I am so delighted with the way the first couple of weeks of his administration has gone. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's been 8 days of good stuff happening every day and getting on the right track. The most important thing right now is getting the vaccine, the number of vials increased, the number of vaccinations increased, and getting it distributed all over the country. As they found out, the Trump administration had no plan to distribute the vaccine. The Biden was willing to invoke the Defense Production Act to get more vials of the vaccine manufactured. Sanofi, which is a French pharmaceutical country, has entered into an agreement with either Pfizer or Moderna to help manufacture the vaccine. And we have got, I think we're going to be on track to have 200 or 250 million people vaccinated by July, and hopefully that will, we'll get a handle on it, and then the rest of the world has to get the vaccine too. You're talking about maybe 6 billion people. That's a tremendous amount of vaccine has to be made to get it under control, and we have to wipe this thing out. Otherwise, it will come back. But in the meantime, for me, my good news is that I get my shot next Tuesday. How's that?
Oh, wow. Your first shot. Now, your second one down the line, I think it was Fauci who talked about the introduction of what he calls a game changer. They're coming out with approval for a vaccine. I don't know which company, one or two companies, as a matter of fact, that will not require a booster.
Yep, that's Johnson & Johnson is very close to doing that, but that's approval is a couple of weeks away, and then it'll be a while before they get enough doses out. But it's coming. In the meantime, when we go down for our first shot, they set up an appointment for the second. So I'll probably in the next I'll have both doses in the next 3.5 weeks, which isn't too bad.
On a personal level, about Alameda, is this being done here, or do you have to go off to San Leandro or Oakland to get this done? Get your shot.
I'm not getting the shot in Alameda. I'm getting it in Mountain View.
Okay.
Yeah, the county of Alameda County has a form to fill out, which I did and never heard from them. Now, if you have, it depends who your health care is with. For example, if you're with Stanford Health, like Alameda Family Physicians is with Stanford Healthcare, you have a My Health. You can go on My Health and get an appointment that way. If you have Sutter Health, they have a website too. Kaiser Permanente is going to be giving shots. Now, a lot of people may or may not have those systems, and depending on the county, you're going to have to get the information from the county, and I don't know what they're doing in Alameda County.
Well, Jerry, you're a retired pharmacist, and they were talking about getting CVS and Walgreens and up and running. Why should that take so long? Why should that be taking so long?
They probably don't have enough vaccine to do it at this point in time.
Actually, the problem has been getting these vaccines into arms, not because there's an excess of the vaccines, and a lot of them are going to waste.
Well, the problem that you have with the CVS's and the Walgreens is that, as you know, the Pfizer dose has to be at 94 degrees below zero. They may not have the refrigeration capability for that. The Moderna is like minus 48 degrees, something like that. So if they have the ability to store the drug properly, then you can do it. So there's an awful lot of CVS and Walgreens stores in the Bay Area, and they have to make sure, and the other clinics, they have to make sure that they can store the vaccine without it having spoil on them. So that may be a problem too.
Well, another thing I'm thinking, why don't they take all the stadiums and arenas in the country and have the people come to them, and you can set up the freezers right there. It should be done. Trump cost thousands of lives by just doing nothing, let alone handling the virus when it first came to be. But I'm talking about the distribution. He had that act going of being able to use the military, but he didn't. And
he did. He didn't. They just fumbled it from day one. But we can't worry about Trump anymore. He's no longer in office. We have to go with what Biden is doing. Dave Cabell of the A's, president of the A's, has offered to use the Oakland Coliseum as a vaccination site, which would be a good idea, which I think it would work, but they got to get the vaccine to them. So that's a possibility for Alameda County. As for
great news that is.
You know, in San Francisco, the Chase Center or or Oracle Park, those are places that could be used. So there are venues that are available. We have to get this going. So and so we will hopefully we can get back to normal, where people will go back to work in their offices, where kids will go back to school. The whole lots of things have to happen, but I think
including education. Folks need to be educated why what they're thinking oftentimes is a myth, and they need to be aware that herd immunity is coming with or without them. So get aboard and live to see it. That's what I say. In the meantime, wear a frickin' mask. I still see people walking the streets of Alameda without a mask. And the lockdown, they ended the lockdown for no apparent reason because the lockdown was put into effect and it wasn't implemented. People didn't stay at home. Non-essential businesses remained open. And I know why that is. You got to keep the economy going, this, that, and the other thing. But I've said on this program and in life, I say it a lot, it is health over wealth. And anything that's being done has always, if you're depending on government to make your decisions, you got to make them yourself. You're going to stay at home for the right reasons or get out and about for the right reasons, but don't depend upon government. 3 dots. Get into. I just want to finish up by getting your impressions of how things are going to go. Are things going to be all right, or is this civil war that's going on in Congress between cuckoos and lesser cuckoos? How are we going to be healed from this? You get people coming in, an insurrection, and how you say, let's put Trump behind us. You're right, but how can we, without making him accountable? How is that going to affect future presidents, just as not making Nixon accountable by Ford pardoning him affected the way things have gone? What if he's not? What if he's not convicted and this guy comes back again?
You're making good points. Trump has to be held accountable for what he did. For 78 days after the election, he claimed that the election was rigged, it was stolen. He complained before the election that if he lost to Joe Biden, it had to be rigged. He did not want people to have the ballots by mail because he knew that the more ballots would come in, the more he would lose by. And he also he knew that as a sitting president, he couldn't be indicted. And if he got elected for another 4 years, the courts couldn't get to him, and the statute of limitations would run out on a bunch of things. He has to be accountable. He invited those people to Washington on January 6th. And then he tried to overturn the election.
Insurrection. Is that not treason? Am I just ranting, or am I being the voice of reason, or some ranting Jewish kid? You know what? Which is it?
No, it's not.
Save me, Jerry Feitelberg.
It's not treason. It was sedition. And he lit the match. Giuliani, Trump Jr., Mo Brooks, all these guys, Trump himself on the ellipse that day. He lit the match. We all saw it. We all saw what happened. We're all witnesses to it. The members of the Senate and the House of Representatives and their staffs had to hide.
Witnesses.
They're witnesses. They had to board up rooms and stay quiet. They admitted that if they found Nancy Pelosi, they were going to kill her. They were going to hang Mike Pence because he refused to overturn the election results. He did what he was supposed to do as required by the Constitution. 5 people were killed. They were doing things that were unconscionable. They are, and Trump is responsible. He has to be held accountable. The Republicans yesterday voted for something that Rand Paul did, and only 5 Republicans voted with the Democrats. That meant 45 Republicans indicated that they're not going to vote for conviction. So what will happen? Hopefully, if he doesn't get convicted, I don't know if they can use that 14th Amendment, which only requires a majority vote, where he can no longer hold office. But when the new Attorney General is confirmed, Merrick Garland, they still can turn all these things over to Merrick Garland and the Justice Department, plus everything else he did. The 10 counts of obstruction of justice that was in the Mueller report can go forward. There's obstruction. There's I think obstruction of justice for Congress, because Congress issued subpoenas to his staff and he refused to let them go. So those people can now testify. They can call in the grand jury, and things are going to take time, but he will be held accountable. You have Cyrus Vance up in New York working on stuff.
Oh yeah, and you got Georgia too. He tried to fix the election in Georgia.
The phone calls to Georgia, which is unbelievable, overturned the election.
Absolutely.
So he's got a lot of problems, and the thing is, you have in Congress now a couple of members of QAnon. If you've been watching television, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is a congressman from Georgia, is a QAnon sympathizer, but when you see her in action, she is unbelievable. She has no business being in Congress. She should be expelled for what she's doing. She thought that the murders in Newtown, Connecticut, and in Parkland, Florida, were false flags. They didn't happen.
I mean, it's just, she confronted a Parkland survivor, High School survivor, and told the survivor that it was all a hoax.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
This is a congressperson in the United States of America, and all they're doing, they're having a talk with her.
Yeah, Kevin McCarthy.
Quote, yeah. We're having a talk. We're going to get together. Come here, young lady. I'm going to give you a good dressing down. Give me a frickin' break. That's what I was referring to when I asked you the question, are we going to be able to recover from this mishegas?
I hope so. But, with people like Mo Brooks, Lauren Boebert, and this one, Margie Taylor Greene, it doesn't bode well. They want to, Boebert and Greene want to carry heat onto the floor of the House of Representatives. Why? If someone objects to what they're saying, they're going to plug them, shoot them? Come on. She has no business being in Congress. In fact, Greene said that she wanted to put a bullet in Nancy Pelosi's head. It's terrible. And she's in Congress to do the business of the people. Sorry. And you got other people from the Republican Party, guys like Jim Jordan, Matt Gaetz. These guys, I think they all got screws loose. I really do.
Yeah. Jim Jordan especially, because he is living in such a glass house. He was a wrestling coach at Ohio State, and there was a doctor who was, for years and years, accused of abusing kids or whatever. I don't remember the circumstances. Maybe you do. But, and he covered it up. That's out there if anybody wants to Google it. And as far as I know, the statute of limitations hasn't run out of that. So
I hope you're right. But go back to Penn State and the abuse there by the coach, and Joe Paterno had to give up his job. Maybe he knew about it, didn't know about it, but he resigned. He did the right thing, and maybe he should have reported. I don't know what went on, but I don't think.
Well,
Bill
they took the
involved.
statue down and gave him a good dressing down, and they took the statue down.
Yeah.
Jerry, life is hectic, but like I tell Tally every day, is this not good drama?
Yeah, it's entertaining television.
All right.
You can't make this stuff up. Yeah.
No, you couldn't. If you wrote it and took it to an agent, the agent would laugh in your face. So, what can I tell you? Keep them floating, Jerry. Thank you for being my friend.
Yeah.
Thank you for being a guest on the show. And thank you for your being. You're terrific.
Well, I enjoy doing the programs with you, and I want to leave you with one thought as we leave, and it's very simple: nations.
Yes, on Webster and Alameda, the best burgers around. Now that'll kill you. I'll tell you a funny joke. I heard a story about the guy who had to have heart bypass surgery, and what they found was a bunch of cholesterol pills clogging up his arteries.
The cholesterol pills?
Yeah. I thought you would enjoy that, being a former pharmacist, and there you go. Jerry, sei gesund. Stay well, my friend.
Stay well. Talk to you again.
All right. Thank you for listening, everybody. You are blessed with Jerry Feitelberg. Not so much myself. I'm kind of the weak link of the whole freaking network. But Jerry, you're special. Adios. Happy trails.
Okay. Bye.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.